My sister's obsessive jealousy led her to fake DNA results at my baby shower. But karma finally caught up. I was born exactly 13 months after my sister Vanessa, close enough that people sometimes mistook us for twins. Nothing could be further from the truth. Where Vanessa was all fire and spontaneity, I was careful reflection. Her artwork covered our shared bedroom walls. My violin case sat neatly in the corner. Sophia thinks she's so special, Vanessa would mutter when she thought I couldn't hear. I remember being 7, hiding behind the staircase as she spat venomous words to her friend. I wish she'd never been born. Mom and Dad always love her more. I worshipped my big sister despite everything. When she created elaborate watercolor landscapes, I'd watch in awe. But my admiration only seemed to fuel her anger. "Stop copying everything I do," she'd snap, snatching paintbrushes from my hands. "Find your own thing." So I did. I poured myself into violin and languages, working methodically where Vanessa blazed with erratic brilliance before abandoning projects half-finished. Everything changed the year I skipped a grade and landed in Vanessa's class. My average grades were nothing special, but Mrs. Peterson's offhand comment, "Vanessa, perhaps you could learn something from your sister's study habits," sparked something terrible in my sister's eyes. I watched her knuckles turn white as she clenched her fists under her desk. The small violences began accumulating. A sharp tug on my hair when we argued over bathroom time, a hard shove that sent me tumbling down the last few steps, a heavy textbook hurled at my head after she received a failing grade in algebra. "Apologize to your sister right now," Dad would demand, his face flushed with anger. Vanessa would mumble the words, but her eyes told a different story. Cold, hate-filled, unrepentant. Drama was Vanessa's salvation, the only place she truly excelled. She transformed on stage, her volatile nature channeled into powerful performances. But even that sanctuary crumbled when she caught her boyfriend kissing another drama club member behind the costume racks. I'll never forget the primal scream that echoed through the auditorium as Vanessa launched herself at the girl, fingernails clawing, words so vicious they made the drama teacher gasp. When someone pulled her away, she broke free, grabbed the girl's designer bag, and set it ablaze with a lighter she kept for emergencies. The school almost expelled her. Our parents paid for damages, scheduled therapy appointments, pleaded with administrators. Vanessa became a pariah, sullen and withdrawn. That night, I lay awake watching my sister's silhouette across our darkened room. For the first time, I felt truly afraid. If she could destroy someone for a teenage romance, what might she do to the sister she'd resented since birth? The summer after the drama club incident, I tried my best to avoid my sister. I joined an intensive language program, volunteered at the library, anything to minimize our time together. But distance didn't matter. Vanessa's eyes followed me everywhere, calculating and cold. When I started making new friends in college, her questions came with surgical precision. "Why are you hanging out with those losers?" she'd ask, leaning against my doorframe. "They're not losers, Vanessa. They're my friends." She'd shrug, that half-smile playing on her lips. "Whatever you say. Let's see how long they stick around." I didn't know then that her words weren't just idle threats. I didn't understand the lengths she would go to ensure my unhappiness. The first time I truly grasped what my sister was capable of was with Daniel. He was everything I'd ever wanted. Thoughtful, ambitious, with a quiet confidence that made me feel safe. After 6 months together, he was going to meet my parents. 3 days before our dinner, Daniel disappeared. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts showed as delivered but unread. His social media accounts had blocked me. I felt like I was losing my mind. After 2 sleepless nights, I drove to his apartment. When he opened the door, his face fell. "Sophia, you shouldn't be here," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "What happened? Please just tell me what I did wrong." He looked genuinely confused. "Your sister explained everything. I can't be involved with someone like... I don't want to get tangled up in a family with those kinds of problems." My blood ran cold. "My sister? Vanessa talked to you?" He nodded slowly. "She showed me the messages, Sophia. The other guys. The things you said about me. She was just trying to protect me." The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Messages? What messages?" "Look, I get it. You're embarrassed. But your sister had proof. Why would she make something like that up?" That question haunted me all the way home. Why indeed? What possible satisfaction could Vanessa get from systematically destroying my happiness? I confronted her that night, shaking with rage and hurt. "How could you do this to me?" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "What have I ever done to deserve this?" Vanessa didn't even look up from her magazine. When she finally met my gaze, her smile chilled me to the bone. "You think you deserved someone like him?" she asked, quietly. Little perfect Sophia, always getting the best of everything without even trying. I just evened the score. He was the one good thing in my life. Exactly. Her voice was frighteningly calm. You don't get to have everything, Sophia. Not while I'm around. In that moment, looking into my sister's eyes, I understood a terrible truth. This wasn't just jealousy. This wasn't sibling rivalry. My own sister, my own blood, genuinely hated me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I had to get away, not just from our shared bedroom or our hometown, but far enough that she could never touch my life again. I began researching universities overseas, scholarships, anything that could put an ocean between us. What I didn't realize was that my nightmare was just beginning. Vanessa wasn't finished with me yet. Not by a long shot. The months after the Daniel incident were the darkest of my life. I felt trapped in my own home, jumping at shadows, analyzing every conversation for hidden traps. I knew I needed to escape, not just from Vanessa, but from her entire sphere of influence. I threw myself into research, applying for every international scholarship I could find. The rejections piled up, each one a blow to my dwindling hope. My savings from 3 part-time jobs weren't nearly enough for tuition abroad, let alone living expenses. You could always stay here, my mother suggested one evening. The state university has offered you that partial scholarship. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. One more year under the same roof as Vanessa. One more year of looking over my shoulder. Strangely, during those months, Vanessa seemed to lose interest in tormenting me. She was busy with her own life, working at a local gallery and dating a series of increasingly troubled men. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with that calculating stare, but she kept her distance. The temporary peace felt more ominous than reassuring. Then finally, the letter arrived. Full scholarship to study linguistics in London. I read it 12 times, certain there must be some mistake. When reality sank in, I nearly collapsed with relief. Freedom was just weeks away. The night before my flight, I was packing the last of my belongings when Vanessa appeared in my doorway. Her face looked different somehow, softer, almost vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I nodded warily, never taking my eyes off her. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands fidgeting in her lap. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for Daniel, for making your life hell." Her voice cracked slightly. "I guess I've always been scared you'd outshine me. And then you did." I stood frozen, searching her face for signs of deception. Was this another manipulation, a last-minute ploy to hurt me before I escaped? "I hope you find what you're looking for over there," she continued when I didn't respond. "Thank you," I managed, not believing a word. It didn't matter anymore. By this time tomorrow, an ocean would separate us. London was everything I'd dreamed and more. For the first time in my life, I could just exist. No comparisons, no competition, no looking over my shoulder. I cut my hair short, experimented with bold clothing, made friends who knew nothing of my past. I thrived in my studies and secured an internship at a prestigious translation firm that quickly turned into a job offer. Every triumph felt like shedding another layer of Vanessa's shadow. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of joy was reclaiming a piece of myself she'd stolen. But 6,000 miles wasn't far enough. Mom let slip during our weekly calls that Vanessa had been asking about my program, my scholarship. "She's thinking about applying to schools in Europe too," Mom said, excitement in her voice. "Wouldn't it be wonderful if you two could be close again?" My blood ran cold. Vanessa had never shown interest in languages or international studies. This wasn't about education, it was about me. Sure enough, 3 months later, Vanessa announced she was coming to visit. "Just for 2 weeks," she promised. "I miss my baby sister." From the moment she stepped off the plane, the air around us crackled with tension. She examined my apartment with narrow eyes, criticized my haircut, it makes your face look round, dismissed my friends as pretentious, and constantly suggested improvements to my life. When I gave her a tour of the translation firm where I worked, she fell uncharacteristically silent, her face darkening as my colleagues greeted me with obvious respect. That night over dinner, she dropped her bombshell. "I've been thinking of moving here," she said casually. "Maybe we could be roommates, like old times." "No," the word escaped before I could soften it. "That's not going to work, Vanessa." Her facade crumbled instantly. "Why not? Because you think you're better than me now, with your fancy job and your perfect life?" "Because I'm finally happy," I said quietly. "And every time you enter my life, you try to destroy that." "I'm sick of everyone comparing us," she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "If I had your opportunities, I would have done so much more with them. Sometimes I wish you'd never existed." In that moment, I saw the truth that had always been there. No distance would ever be enough. Vanessa's hatred wasn't about what I did. It was about who I was. She left the next morning without saying goodbye. As I watched her taxi disappear, relief washed over me alongside a lingering dread. This wasn't over. With Vanessa, it never would be. I spent 3 years building my life in London, carefully constructing a fortress against Vanessa's influence. Then, at a colleague's birthday gathering, I met James. He wasn't what I expected. Quiet, thoughtful, with an easy laugh that made the room feel warmer. We bonded over shared interests in languages and travel, becoming friends before anything else. I kept him at arm's length initially, the ghost of Daniel's betrayal still haunting me. "Let me take you to dinner," he finally said, after months of casual conversations. Just dinner, no pressure. That dinner turned into weekly dates, which blossomed into the healthiest relationship I'd ever known. James never pushed, never demanded, never made me feel like I needed to be someone else. For the first time, I found myself sharing the truth about Vanessa, about my past. He listened without judgment, holding my hand as the words tumbled out. "She can't hurt you anymore," he promised, his eyes steady on mine. "Not unless you let her." 2 years into our relationship, on a rainy evening overlooking the Thames, James dropped to one knee. I said yes before he could even finish his question. We were planning our London wedding when the job offer came. A prestigious position at an international consulting firm with double my current salary. The catch? I'd need to return home. "We should consider it," James said when I showed him the email. "This could fast-track your career by years." "But Vanessa is just one person. We're building a life together that's bigger than her influence." And so we returned, renting a house across town from my parents. My family embraced James immediately. Dad took him golfing, Mom taught him her secret recipes, and he charmed them all with his genuine warmth. Vanessa, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent from family gatherings. When we did cross paths, she'd offer a tight smile before finding reasons to leave. I told myself her distance was a blessing, but something about her silence unsettled me. Then came the invitation to Vanessa's wedding. She'd met a man named Larry at her art gallery. Tall, conventionally handsome, with a booming laugh and wandering eyes. Their courtship was brief and intense. The wedding itself was a disaster. Larry drank himself into a rage, picking a fight with a waiter who looked at Vanessa wrong. My parents spent the reception making apologies while Vanessa dragged her new husband home, her face a mask of humiliation and fury. As the months passed, the stark contrast between our marriages became impossible to ignore. James and I built a partnership based on mutual respect. We supported each other's careers, made decisions together, and found joy in our shared life. Vanessa and Larry existed in a cycle of chaos. He bounced between jobs, never lasting more than a few months before being fired or quitting. After particularly bad fights, Vanessa would show up at our parents' doorstep with hastily packed bags, staying a few days before returning to him without explanation. I tried reaching out, offering an ear without judgment, but she'd brush me off. "Mind your perfect little life, Sophia," she'd snap. "Not everyone gets a fairy tale." The situation reached its breaking point when Larry arrived at my parents' house one Sunday dinner, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. "She's cheating," he announced to the stunned table. With her boss at the gallery. Mom gasped. Dad stared at his plate. I felt a strange absence of surprise. Vanessa had never been satisfied with what she had. Then Larry's voice cracked. I finally had enough. I told her to get out. He pulled out his phone, swiping through a series of photos that made my stomach lurch. His face with a broken nose, a black eye, split lip. She's been doing this for years, he said quietly. I should have pressed charges, but I loved her. How pathetic is that? The silence that followed was deafening. We'd all seen Vanessa's rage, her capacity for cruelty, but this was something else entirely. She hadn't just destroyed her marriage, she'd become the very monster she claimed to hate. 2 months later, James and I discovered I was pregnant. When we shared the news at Christmas dinner, the family erupted in joy. Even Dad teared up, pulling James into a bear hug. Vanessa, who'd been living with our parents since the separation, offered a tight-lipped congratulations before cornering me in the kitchen. You should name her after Mom if it's a girl, she insisted. It's family tradition. We're actually thinking of naming her after James's grandmother, I said carefully. Her eyes flashed. Of course you are. God forbid you consider your own family's wishes, always thinking you're above us all. As her words escalated, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in my chest. I placed a protective hand over my still flat stomach, suddenly afraid in a way I couldn't articulate. Would Vanessa allow me this joy? Or would she find ways to poison this too, as she had everything else I'd ever loved? The storm clouds were gathering, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. As my pregnancy progressed, Vanessa's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She appeared at our house unannounced, bringing baby clothes and offering unsolicited advice about everything from nutrition to nursery colors. The sudden transformation from resentful sister to doting aunt left me constantly on edge. Her obsession with the baby's name became particularly unsettling. She called almost daily with new suggestions, each time growing more insistent. Have you decided on a name yet? She'd ask, her voice falsely casual. James and I are still discussing options, I'd reply, deliberately vague. You should really consider something from our family. It's tradition, Sophia. Her tone would sharpen. Or are you too good for traditions now? We'll let everyone know when we decide. Why are you shutting me out? This is important family business, Sophia. Don't be so selfish. After these conversations, I'd find myself shaking, one hand protectively covering my growing belly. James noticed my distress and suggested we limit contact with her until after the birth. Let's focus on enjoying this time, he said, massaging my shoulders. This is our journey. When Mom offered to host a small baby shower at our childhood home, I hesitated but eventually agreed. She promised to keep it intimate, just close friends and immediate family. I specifically asked for no games, no embarrassing rituals, just a relaxed gathering to celebrate our baby boy. The afternoon started perfectly. Our living room was tastefully decorated in soft blues and whites. Mom had prepared my favorite foods, and my closest friends arrived bearing thoughtful gifts. James stayed by my side, his hand never far from mine. Then Vanessa walked in. My first thought was that she looked like a stranger. Her hair was styled differently, her makeup more subdued. But what truly stunned me was her t-shirt, emblazoned with Godmother-to-be in glittering letters. James's hand tightened around mine. We had already asked his sister to be godmother months ago. Vanessa worked the room like she was hosting, complimenting everyone, laughing too loudly, inserting herself into every conversation. Yet beneath her exaggerated warmth ran a current of criticism aimed squarely at me. Such a simple spread, Sophia. I would have helped if you'd asked. Smaller turnout than I expected. Guess not everyone is as excited about this baby as you thought. I gritted my teeth and smiled, determined not to let her ruin this day. The moment came to cut the gender reveal cake. James and I held the knife together, surrounded by our loved ones, cutting into the moist layers to reveal blue filling. The room erupted in cheers. James kissed me deeply, his eyes shining with happiness. It's a boy, my best friend squealed, hugging us both. Excuse me, everyone, I have an important announcement. Vanessa's voice cut through the celebration. She stood on a chair, waving a document above her head. The room quieted, confused faces turning toward her. Before we continue celebrating, there's something you all need to know. Her voice carried a theatrical gravity. Sophia had a DNA test done, and James is not the father of this baby. Time seemed to stop. James froze beside me, his body suddenly rigid. Our friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. My mother gasped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process the malice required to fabricate such a lie. My mother snatched the paper from Vanessa's hand, scanning it quickly. "This is nonsense," she declared. "This isn't even a real medical document." Vanessa's face split into a satisfied smile. "I just wanted everyone to see how controlling James really is. Look how quickly he doubted Sophia. One piece of paper and he's ready to believe the worst." "Are you insane?" I screamed, finding my voice at last. "You just tried to destroy the happiest day of my life to prove some delusional point?" Vanessa's smile faltered, but she pushed on. "No man is happy when his wife earns more than him. Don't pretend James is different." The room rippled with uncomfortable murmurs as people began to understand what was happening. Vanessa had planned this sabotage, had come specifically to ruin this day. "You need help, Vanessa," James said quietly. "Professional help." A movement from the back of the room caught everyone's attention. Larry, who I hadn't even realized was present, approached Vanessa with measured steps. His face was a mask of cold determination. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it deliberately in Vanessa's hands. "What's this?" she asked, her triumphant expression faltering. "Divorce papers," Larry replied, his voice carrying in the silent room. "I was going to give them to you tonight in private, but since you enjoy public spectacle so much, this seemed fitting." Vanessa's face drained of color as she stared at the envelope. "You've turned our marriage into a living hell," Larry continued, his voice steady. "I'm done. I'm finally done." The silence stretched unbearably until someone, I think it was my cousin, let out a small, inappropriate laugh. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces watching her, some pitying, others openly disgusted. The carefully constructed performance crumbled before our eyes. Her shoulders slumped, her face contorted, and without another word she fled the room, leaving the divorce papers scattered on the floor behind her. In the days following the baby shower disaster, a profound shift occurred in our family. My parents, who had always tried to mediate between Vanessa and me, finally drew their line in the sand. Dad boxed up Vanessa's remaining belongings and left them on the porch. Mom changed the locks. When Vanessa called, screaming and demanding to be let back in, Dad simply said, "You've gone too far. Find somewhere else to stay," and hung up. Larry moved in with a friend and filed for a restraining order. Over coffee with my parents, he shared the full extent of Vanessa's abuse, not just the physical violence, but the psychological torture, the isolation, the constant fear. "I could have pressed charges multiple times," he admitted, his voice hollow. "She would have gone to jail, but I kept thinking she'd change." "We failed her somehow," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We should have seen," Dad placed his hand over hers. "No. Vanessa made her choices. We all have darkness in us, but most of us don't let it consume us." They made it clear that if Vanessa ever approached me or my baby, they wouldn't hesitate to involve the police. It was the first time I truly believed I might be free of her shadow. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Alexander James came into the world after 18 hours of labor. When they placed his tiny, perfect body on my chest, I felt an overwhelming surge of love and fierce protectiveness. "He's beautiful," James whispered, his forehead pressed against mine, tears mingling with mine. "Just like his mother." We built our family surrounded by love. James's parents moved closer to help with the baby. My parents visited almost daily, bringing home-cooked meals and offering to watch Alex so we could get some rest. Friends came bearing gifts and genuine joy for our happiness. Vanessa left town without saying goodbye to anyone. According to mutual acquaintances, she moved to the West Coast, taking a job at a small gallery. She never called, never wrote, never acknowledged her nephew's existence. Her absence felt like finally being able to breathe after a lifetime of suffocation. On Alex's first birthday, as I watched him giggling in James's arms, frosting smeared across his chubby cheeks, I realized something profound. The fear was gone. That constant, gnawing dread that had become so familiar I'd stopped recognizing it. It had vanished without my even noticing. That night, after everyone had left and Alex was sleeping peacefully in his crib, I stood in the nursery watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. James wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. I smiled, leaning back into his embrace. "Just that she can't touch us anymore. Any of us." The chapter of my life dominated by Vanessa's toxicity had finally closed. Ahead lay only the story James, Alex, and I would write together. One filled with love instead of fear, joy instead of pain, freedom instead of control. I was finally truly free.